Hi everybody, Professor Michalsen here. I'm going to talk to you today about our topic, A History of Slavery. Before I start though, I'd like to remind you all to get posting. You've done a great job on the Welcome to Human Trafficking discussion board, introducing yourselves. Make sure everybody gets to that. Maybe you'll meet some long lost friends like Brian and Morrow have. So this is our second topic, A History of Slavery. I've only seen about 5 postings to that board, so not only should you be posting your one initial post, but make sure that you start replying to other people's posts. You need to post at least 3 times to every board. I won't be checking at the end of each night if you've posted 3 times, but just make sure you don't get behind on those postings. Okay? So let's start about the topic of a history of slavery. I don't have all that much to say. Your book does a good job of covering it, but I wanted to go over a few things that I wanted to talk about. So, talking about history is one of the questions that I asked on the discussion board. What most people would say is that it's important to talk about history because it informs our understanding of what's going on today. It gives context to what's going on today. That what is happening today sort of has a legacy in the past. So we all think about slavery as being over, which it is here in the United States. Slavery, it's important for you to realize at the beginning of this course that slavery is one form of what's called unfree labor. In unfree labor, we have a worker who is highly vulnerable, that the terms of the agreement can be changed at any time by the person who holds the bond, the indenture, the servitude. There is chattel slavery is what most of us recognize as traditional slavery. It's when there is someone who owns another person legally, and that chattel slavery is considered to be desirable, and that it confers upon someone some status. You should recognize this from the slavery that happened in the history of this country. There are other types of unfree labor, indentured servitude, where someone works simply for boarding, a place to live, and also perhaps passage somewhere, going from one place to the other. Debt bondage is when someone works for someone else to cancel out a debt. Penal labor is prison labor, and in fact some of you may have heard recently about a strike going on in a prison in Georgia, where the prisoners, a number of prisons in Georgia, in fact, where prisoners are striking because they're not being paid for their work. Some people believe that work by people in prison is a type of unfree labor, though that would be a controversial thing to say. Another type of unfree labor is something called a truck system, where people work for commodities or some sort of currency substitute, where they're not working for money, they're working for, this happens often, you'll see in the farm and field labor, where you work for some strange currency that's only useful there, some sort of tokens or something like that, rather than money. And so it's a closed system where people only are able to use their money in that system. So basically what I'm trying to say is that though chattel slavery ended in the 1800s, unfree labor is something that's been around for a very long time and continues to this day. So we can think of this, some people choose to think about it as old slavery versus new slavery. Where slaves, now in the new slavery, people are considered to be more disposable than they were considered to be in the past. Before they were status, they were property, and now they're considered more disposable. I I'm not going to go too far over the history of slavery. I'd like you to take a look at the articles that are in the course documents, the folder in course documents on a history of slavery, to take a look at different types of slavery that have gone on. But I think that it's important to think of just a few different things. First of all, that in the past, slavery became more acceptable because, for example, the Europeans labeled African people as slaves, as other. This concept of other is going to come up a lot this semester. That they were different from white Europeans, and therefore it was okay for them to be used as property. So pay attention over the course of the semester to where you are thinking of people as other. Feminist scholars would talk about the label women and children. There's actually some theorists who have turned that into one word, where we think of women and children as property, or as less than others, men, for example. And that by othering people, it makes it more acceptable to turn them into property. Second thing is changes in technology and economic conditions. We're going to talk soon about globalization. So think about the different things that have changed over the course of history to make trafficking and slavery more possible. Boats, for example, made the passage with huge numbers of people possible where it wasn't before. Also, weapons made it possible to go into places like Africa and scare people into coming in large numbers. And also capital markets, loaning large amounts of money allowed people to start up trips to get slaves, and also to start up plantations where they could work. The abolition of slavery started the sort of advocacy for abolition of slavery started getting steam in the 1800s. And then by the mid-century, it was largely considered illegal. People working towards emancipation. And in the Americas, it was emancipation and the criminalization of slavery by the 1870s. Of course, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, freeing our slaves. However, unfree labor continued well past the 1870s and into today. Former slaves found it very hard to find work after slavery was ended. So there was a solid amount of debt bondage that happened after that. And also there were other forms of slavery that ended up happening to Chinese people, for example. And also there was a big panic about the white slave trade that went on in the early 1900s, where people got really worked up, really afraid that white people were becoming the sort of targets of slave people who were buying slaves. And there was a whole bunch of legislation and laws that happened in the first part of the 20th century focused on white slaves. The idea that women particularly were powerless at the hands of these evil slave owners, and all of these different laws came into place to protect women from the sex trade, really. Now, the thing that I'd like you to focus on, too, is the book. You'll hear me say this a lot over the course of this semester. The Slave Next Door book has a very clear perspective, and I'd like you to pay attention to that perspective and not be sucked in by it too much. Try to view it with an objective eye. Our book focuses very much on solutions that are punitive, that are punishing perspectives, to lock up traffickers, an eye for an eye type of perspective. The problem is that they're not effective as far as we have done them so far. that when we worry, sort of when we have what's called a moral panic, this terror that somehow our shared morality is being affected, that we tend to focus on punitive methods, punishment methods. However, if we try to define the issue as more of a human rights issue, which you'll see in the Kempadu book later in our readings, that the focus is more on empowerment of potential victims and of victims, something that's been shown to be more effective. The elimination of poverty is obviously not so easily done, but empowerment of victims can prevent, or potential victims, can prevent the problem in the first place. Now, a last piece of what I wanted to say is this. I'd like you also to think about why human trafficking has come into the public eye recently. Why all of a sudden we're discovering this new problem that's really not a new problem at all. And I'd like you to think about what's happening in the country right now. What are the fears that are going on in our country right now? Think about what's happening with immigration. And the political firestorm going on around immigration. Think about this topic of globalization, how our economies are changing, how poverty is changing, how wealth is moving, and how the focus on human trafficking, while noble in its focus on protecting victims, can also maybe hide fear of others, the same way that slaves were othered, that Africans were othered in order to make it okay to make them slaves. How might that also be playing now when we look at our immigration debate? And think particularly about how poverty looks. When we talk about globalization soon, we'll learn a lot about how poverty is largely in the world a problem of women, and that trafficking then being something that happens very much to women maybe plays along with that. Okay, so that's a lot to think about. Get to posting on the discussion board about what I've talked about and about what you've read in the book and in the links in the folder in the course documents section. And then next we'll be talking about the measurement of human trafficking, which is frankly a mess. We don't know anything. And what I'd like you to be thinking about as you do your reading is, if you had the power to measure human trafficking, how would you do it? If that were your job, somebody tasked you with that job, how would you start? And how would you continue working on that project? Okay, so start thinking about that and do the reading. The reading for the measurement topic is in the course documents folder. I believe it's Lasco and Gramegna, I believe is the name of the PDF file. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry about that. Let me actually check that real quick and just make sure that I've got that right while I click around. Hang on. Here's Blackboard for me. Human trafficking. Remember, most of our documents are here. So I'm clicking on course documents, and then there's a folder for each topic. So here's measurement, how do we know what we know, which is the next topic. Yep, Lasco and Gramegna, 2003. It's a PDF. Okay? So happy reading, everybody, and happy thinking, and I'll see you soon.